Every day is a blessing.
Every day above ground is a blessing.
Yes, sir. I think people were asking me regarding the governor's press conference that he's having at 11 o'clock. My guidance was both of these events will be recorded. So people who had signed up, we encourage them to stay signed up, and we'll be able to make sure that those who listen here should be able to find a version of what the governor says at 11 o'clock online as well.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Go ahead and get started.
Yes. Right, Jerome, you ready to go ahead and start off with the welcome and introductions?
I am.
All right, let's do it.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this discussion with the Montgomery County Executive Marc Elrich and the business and nonprofit communities. This conversation was well underway before the information regarding the relief grant was known, and it was underway because the executive wanted to hear from this important segment of our population. I want to thank you, Leslie McDonald and Nonprofit Montgomery and Alliance of Nonprofits Serving Montgomery County for hosting the call. We have nearly 800 people registered for this call. So as you have sent information via chat in your computers, it is technology, so let's make sure we're patient and everyone will be heard and we will get the questions answered that we know that you have. Some questions were sent in advance, and we thank you. We have forwarded those to the presenters. We have also made sure that the executive is aware of a lot of what is needed to be covered today, and we're going to do our best to make sure that we answer as many questions as we can. We want to make sure that everyone knows and understands we don't have all the answers. We're not saying we have all the answers. We're communicating what we know at this time, and the most important thing is we're communicating what the executive's intentions are at this time. Today, we ask people that when you do have a question, if you don't get to it and you want to make sure that you're heard, use your chat feature. We're going to get to as many of those as we can. For those people who could not join this call, we are recording. We will put this out online. We want to make sure that people who had a conflict, as I just mentioned earlier, the governor is having his press conference right now. And, when you do have competing events like this, we do want to make sure that they're recorded, posted online for people who were not able to be there live. We do have a panel that will be helping us today. And myself, once again, I am Jerome Fletcher. I'm Assistant Chief Administrative Officer in the County Executive Office, along with my colleague, Caroline Sturgis, who is also an Assistant Chief Administrative Officer. Leslie McDonald is also assisting and aiding. She is the Executive Director of Nonprofit Montgomery. So the purpose of this meeting, we know that there are challenging times and everyone is still trying to figure out what to do during this complex crisis that we're dealing with. The executive has advocated for a public health emergency grant to be a point of relief and a package for this particular group to help nonprofits as well as the business community. We have also stood up resources on a business resource page to provide information to the public so that they would be able to gather information in a quick, feasible, and digestible way. And what we're seeking for today's call is a chance to hear from the executive and to listen to you. We want to thank you in advance for being here. Some of the topics that we're going to discuss will be the public health emergency grant, as well as business, personal property tax, hotel tax deadline, potential extensions, as well as the Earn Sick and Safe law. The questions that we received early in advance rotated around a lot of these three topics in various ways, as you can imagine. But after we hear from the executive, I do want you to know that when we close, there will be a way for you, the public, to communicate to us, the business staff, so that you are able to get more questions answered. So at this time, once again, thank you for participating. I'm going to turn it over to our County Executive, Marc Elrich.
Hi, everybody. I think I want to start just with a little bit of an overview. We are well aware of the problems being faced by the business community, particularly small business community out there today, and the general lack of funding to let people get through this crisis. And so I've been in contact with the governor's office for almost 2 weeks now, I guess, talking about the need for a long-term plan that once the virus is over, we're likely to have an economic crisis that outruns the virus. And in talking to a number of small businesses, it was very clear that there are people who won't reopen their doors unless they have some level of certainty about what that environment is going to be like. So the effort we made is to do what we can do at the county level, and we've put aside $25 million as a start on this. It'll likely be coming out of the reserves, and the state has moved forward with their package. My concern is that even if a person survives the virus period, and if it's 2 or 3 months, it's 2 or 3 months, but if they're faced with a desire to collect debts or rents, back rents, or anything else, they may well decide that there's no way they're going to be able to pay those when they reopen, and they may decide not to open their doors at all. And that would be, in my mind, a disaster, because then we'd have not only the closure of the businesses, but we'd have all the attendant job loss and all the attendant economic consequences of that going forward. So I continue to talk to people about the needs for an intervention that goes beyond whatever stimulus we're talking about doing. I'm a believer that at some point, I've heard somebody else, Bob Eisinger, I don't know if he's on the call, but he's talked about a pause, however you want to phrase it. We need a period of time when people aren't paying rent and they're not paying debt, and that it's just a timeout. And then when this is over with, we resume business as usual and figure out how over a long period of time people can make up as best as possible, in some cases not at all, what they weren't able to pay during the closure. I think absent a long-term plan that addresses that, we're going to have real serious problems in terms of businesses coming back up after this is over. They're going to have a hard enough time surviving this with all non-essential businesses closed. There's no revenue coming in. You still, if you had a restaurant and you bought equipment for your restaurant, you probably have loan payments on the equipment. You've probably got rent payments due. Hard to make those if you don't have income, and hard to face those even if they're forgiven or if they're postponed. It's going to be hard to face them when you reopen. So we need a long-term strategy. But absent that, and this is beyond the power of the county executive to do, because believe me, I asked some questions about what I could do with executive power. We've decided to move forward with a small business emergency assistance program. And as I was working on it, it turns out that Andrew Friedson and other council members were looking at the same thing. So my staff, their staff, spent the weekend putting together a bill that was introduced yesterday and that will get acted on next Tuesday. The details of that are being worked on, or I should say the regulatory mechanism for that is being worked on even as we wait for the bill, because the bill will not specify all the details of how it's implemented and regulated. And that's what our staffs are going to be working on over the coming week or two, is to deal with issues of what expenses are eligible. I'm not sure whether the final bill will be 75 people, 100 people, or 50 people. That's up to the council. We've got a cap in there right now of $75,000 a business. Obviously, it's not just a grant of $75,000, but it's going to be based on expenses that are determined to be eligible. And we'll be moving forward that as expeditiously as possible. I note that some people want to be sure this is not a massive paper bureaucracy, and I think everybody is looking at this with an eye to, how shall I say it, making sure that you're not tied up in paper forever, that the reviews do not take forever, and the relief can be brought forward as quickly as possible. And I'm going to continue to work with the governor's office to get them to really address the big picture and the long-term picture here. Another thing that we've pushed on, and I'm really glad to see this in the governor's legislation, is that the money come in the form of grants rather than loans. And if you're going to do loans, that the loans be very, very long-term, and that there be a delay before loan repayments are expected to be implemented. Because even if a business is able to open up, the last thing they're going to need is additional debt settled on them immediately. And grants would be preferable, and that's going to be that's our preference in our program. And I'm hoping the governor follows suit. And I am talking regularly with the governor's staff. So there's an ongoing effort, I think, to triage this in the best way that we can triage it. So I think I'll stop there for the moment. Jerome, do you want to do questions, or how do you want to do this?
I believe we're receiving questions in, and Caroline and Leslie are going to see if some of them are applicable to what you just spoke on.
Yes, hi, thank you. Caroline Sturgis here. Yes, so far we have received a number of questions. As a reminder to all of the participants, if you have a question that you want to ask the county executive, please do so in the Q&A box. And between Leslie and I, we will alternate and try to get to as many questions as we possibly can. So the first one that we have here, it looks like, is, will staff be able to receive their full salaries from unemployment?
I don't believe staff ever receives full salaries. Unemployment is usually a percentage of what you got paid, so it's unlikely that it's going to be a full salary. I was looking at the federal grant, the 1,200 they're anticipating at 1,250. That's about enough money if you were a minimum wage worker to cover take-home pay for about 3 weeks at about minimum wage. For staff above that, the 1,250 is going to be something, but for a lot of people, it's not going to come close to replacing what they had. I will say that in terms of benefits, we're looking to make sure that our program dovetails with state programs, and to the extent there might be federal programs, because we'd like our dollars to stretch as far as possible. So if there are state programs that a person can apply to, and they have limitations, then we would look at a way of addressing our programs in the same light and providing additional supplemental support beyond what the state's able to give. So part of this is obviously going to evolve once we get guidance from the state on their program, but hopefully this will all come together shortly.
Great, thank you. Good morning. This is Leslie McDonald from Nonprofit Montgomery. There was one person who asked whether or not these funds will be available for nonprofits as well, and that the answer is yes. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes. Great. Fantastic. Next question is, will self-employed people be able to find relief in any of these programs?
That's one of the things we're looking for guidance on. I saw some reference in the state to this. I have not been able to find it because I just saw it as I was reading through more information than I wish I was reading. There was a reference to kind of folks in the gig economy. Obviously, those people are losing work as well. And as are sole proprietors who might have, just be single contractors. So we'll look at that, and hopefully, I think the state is looking at that. Clearly, people are going to have to bend the distinction in unemployment that's traditionally been used, that this is about employers and employees, and with small businesses and folks in the gig economy, the employer and the employee are one and the same, but they're without work, just like everybody else, through no fault of their own. So I'm hoping that we get some guidance in how the state is treating it, how they're treating it for unemployment, and figure out how we're going to deal with it as well.
Okay, looks like the next question we have from someone is, why have the mobile crisis services closed?
I did not know the mobile crisis services had closed. I thought that we were still dealing with, are you talking about health services or mental health services? Because what I was told is that we were still putting social workers out on calls to respond to needs, child protective services or other needs that were necessary. If they're county clinics or if they're part of Mobile Med or Montgomery Cares, we will find out what they're doing with their facilities. But my understanding was that the clinics were certainly still open. But
Okay.
again, we'll have to follow up.
Yes, we will. Thank you.
Okay, the next question. I have a remodeling company with only 2 full salaried employees and subcontractors. We don't have any jobs coming in because of the situation. What should we do?
Boy, I hate to be an advisor on this. As I understand it, and there is if you go to the state dollar website, DLLR, they have a Q&A. I was looking at the Q&A actually before I got on this call. I would really contact them to see how they are qualifying people. My sense was that if you didn't have work and your employees didn't have work, weren't working, that they would qualify for unemployment. I know that they're even looking at part-time. And so if people have been reduced to part-time, working fewer hours than they were working before, people would be eligible for partial unemployment. But I'm not an unemployment specialist, so I would refer you to the dollar site and the Q&A, and then they've got further ways of contacting people at dollar.
Okay. Our next question here is, how can additional funding be made available to support nonprofit providers of services for people with disabilities that do not qualify as a small business? This individual says that they're struggling to keep their operations going. They also have a child care center which is closed, and they are possibly facing layoffs of staff in the near future, which is the last thing that they want to do.
Well, the layoffs will be covered by unemployment. Ongoing expenses, I'm not sure why you wouldn't qualify unless you're over whatever target limit we have in the bill. And like I said, that bill has not been passed. It's going over Tuesday for discussion, and I'm sure passage the same day. So I can't answer whether or not you would be eligible for assistance under this program. The county's going to have to take a look. When we sent over our budget, our opening paragraph said that, this is the work we had done. Obviously, the universe has somewhat changed. And so our budget's going to get reformed as we go forward. And we close by restating the same thing. We may have to make adjustments. We also, we provide services here, and we've got to make sure we're providing the services the residents need as well. We're likely to have serious reductions in revenues, which is going to affect our ability to do things throughout the year. So I'll just say you're going to need to come to us with specific cases and specific needs, and we can prioritize, for example, our grants. It may be that all grants have to be prioritized to things that relate to healthcare and employment. That's going to be a group discussion, and we will talk about that.
This is Leslie again. I did receive a clarification on crisis services, and just that child protective services and adult protective services are of course still working and providing services. They may not be keeping staff on site, but they are available in any kind of crisis to respond. So no worries about that. The next question has to do with faith-based organizations. Will they be able to apply for these grants as well as businesses, so churches?
I'm going to assume they qualify as nonprofits. They may be able to get some assistance. That'll all depend on how the regs get written. But I think everybody's going to keep that in mind, because a lot of the faith-based services provide needed services out to the community, and I'd hate to lose the work that people are doing over this.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's see, I think another one is, will private preschools run by churches be considered?
If there's small businesses, I think every small, we didn't eliminate them as a category. So if you're a small business, I'm sure that we'll be looking at that.
Okay.
But remember, but again, you know, your employees, if you're not in business right now because of this closure, your employees should file for unemployment, and they're eligible back to the day that they no longer had work. And the state has no waiting period, so you don't have to go through a waiting period to become eligible. The state has waived any requirement that a person has to go out and look for jobs and submit proof that they're looking for a job, because everybody knows there aren't any jobs, or there's certainly not a lot of people hiring. So the state has really liberalized how they're going to be treating unemployment, and your employees should be able to get protection right away.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next question is, will we be able to see the bill before it's voted on?
I hope so. I mean, this is a council bill that was introduced yesterday, as I understand it. It was introduced in the afternoon. So that bill should be available. There should be a packet online. If you go to Montgomery County Government, go to the County Council, go to agendas. You should be able to find the agenda for yesterday, the items for yesterday, and pick the bill down offline.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, will 501c6 nonprofits be eligible?
Tell me what the C6 designation is.
Okay.
I don't know that.
Right.
Chambers of
Jerome,
Commerce.
I'm sorry?
It's Chambers of Commerce.
Chambers of
And
Commerce.
other advocacy group associations, I believe, certain kinds of associations.
I don't know the answer to that. I really don't. Again, you know, you're mostly staff, and so if you lay off staff, they're eligible and covered for unemployment.
All right. Jerome, I was going to ask you, I know you're familiar with the bill. Did we identify which nonprofits will be? I'm not sure if we actually broke it down in the bill itself.
We did not. The first draft of the bill, or the draft that went over the council, did not specify different nonprofits. It did include information such as the reimbursables that we were looking to impact, such as salary, wages, benefits, inventory, equipment, other financial obligations. The key there is being able to have that ability to demonstrate a loss. And once you have that, then you are eligible for the up to a certain number, but it's based on what you can demonstrate. But as far as the categories, as you can imagine, I believe council will have a more detailed version of who will be able to apply as you break it down in the different sections, because you still have small businesses such as daycares that are going to be eligible. You have faith-based organizations like we mentioned earlier, and then you have others that will have to be fit into that equation as well.
I will say I saw one of the things in the federal bill. I just got a copy of the federal bill. It is not very specific. They're also, I guess, writing the regulations for that. But one of the things that they talk about is a tax credit for businesses, I think, that maintain employees at 50% of their hours. And that if you do that, there will be significant tax benefits to go with that. But again, it's not spelled out how much of a tax benefit or what the benefit is. But again, we've got to coordinate our programs with other programs, and we're going to direct people to all sources of help so that we're not the sole source of help. The county can't possibly be a sole source of help based on the revenues we have available. So we need to make sure our programs are supplemental, additional, and in some case fill gaps that other people aren't able to fill. And late breaking news, the governor announced that schools will be closed till April 24th. So they're going out for another month.
Okay, next question. Somebody's asking for clarification on the size of the business, the number of employees. If you could just clarify that. And then there's also a question is that if an organization only has one employee, for example, a nonprofit, can they still apply?
Jerome, was there a lower limit? I thought the upper limit agreed to was 75, but I'm not sure.
The final one that made it into the bill was, I believe, 100. It went back to 100. And there has been conversation regarding if we are going to tier it. For example, 50 employees and under would receive one amount of funding that would be available versus 75 and under versus 100 and under. I think what the leadership is trying to do is to provide flexibility to include as many as possible during this time. As you said earlier, we want to make it simple and include as many people as possible.
The state's program right now is 50 people or less.
50 people is the traditional number when
Yes.
when you say small business. That is exactly correct.
Okay. Let's see, next question is we have what type of grants will be available for nonprofits? So I guess it's basically what type of grants are available for underneath this program, since it's eligible for both the small businesses and nonprofits.
I think they're working, that's part of what we're working on now is what the regulations are going to be, what's going to be covered, and how much of an expense is going to be covered, and those are the details that are going to get hammered out over the next week or two so we can actually implement it. I don't think the language of the bill is specific enough to actually detail all that.
That's correct, Executive. It is not that specific right now. And what the charge of your staff will be is to, once the regulations are, once the bill is acted upon next Tuesday on March 31st with council, I'm pretty sure there will be some amendments that will be offered and accepted for it. And we will then have to take that and then create a program that matches the expectations of the bill that is passed. And again, our goal is to do that quickly with an online process. And have staff that answers questions all through the process of how quickly we can get the application process completed, as well as getting the funds dispersed to the community.
All right, next question is along those same lines. When the application might be open and the window of time to apply. Would you say that's still TBD?
Well,
Sounds like it's TBD to me.
yes, I would say yes, but we all have a very high sense of urgency. I do want to say that recognizing the situation that we're all in, it will do us no good if it takes us 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to get our program up and running and cash out the door. Then we've missed the mark and people would have still been suffering during that time period. Our goal is to be as quick as possible.
Okay.
As uncomplicated as possible.
That is true. The government has a reputation of being slightly complicated, so we are going to make sure that we don't allow that to affect this process.
All right, we have a question here from a sole proprietor who says that, you know, there is no relief available through what is currently being offered to small businesses. And their question is there anything likely to be available for them?
So I think, you know, there is no lower limit on businesses. Am I correct, Jerome? They didn't specify more than one person?
It did not. It did not say, it did not put a minimum on it. So all we were talking about were different thresholds of what was not to be exceeded. And even that has been debated amongst those who are involved in this process. So what I would say is I believe that the sole proprietorship community is being considered during this process. And as we get more details, we'll make sure that we provide information as the results of that.
All right. Our next question is, would Montgomery Care Safety Net clinics apply for this type of grant? And as a nonprofit, I would assume yes.
We have to look at how we fund Montgomery Care's safety net clinics. I mean, we provide them money. So I'm not sure what the anticipation is. I know when we've talked about healthcare resources, we've talked about making sure that anything that the county can get, that those testing kits, for example, that at some point when we get them, that those things go out to the clinics as well. So I'm not sure they don't have a lot of income, if much income at all. I'm not sure what we're replacing. But at the same time, if they're nonprofits, they would technically qualify.
Okay. We do have a question here from one for long-standing organizations and businesses. Could eligibility criteria be based on tenure and track record rather than specific expenses, assuming that the expenses are somewhat hard to predict given the change in delivery environment? So I know we're still working on defining the program, so.
I don't know how one lets tenure and whatever it is trump whether or not someone had to close their doors or can't pay rent. I mean, I think expenses are expenses, and that's what we're focusing on is trying to help people with expenses. Well, I guess we'll look at it. Jerome,
Yeah, what I would say is, I think it's a good question, but I think that the tenure doesn't really come into play right now. The purpose of the relief package, and correct me if I'm wrong, executive, because it is your purpose, is to make sure that you provide relief to the people who are being impacted in the weeks that have just passed us and the weeks that are upcoming from us. And when those businesses, nonprofits, faith-based and small and other can demonstrate that this is what my income would have looked like had this crisis not happened, then that's when we say, okay, we're here to help you fill in that void. And again, you were so correct when you say that our package and our program needs to tie in directly to what others are being offered. We are looking at we're looking at assistance from a national level, from a state level, and from a local government level. I think everyone is trying to do as much as they can, and the programs themselves combined should provide the community, especially Montgomery County, with some sense of relief.
I just want to add on this point. I'm hoping that anybody who's in a business that closed, particularly after the governor's announcement that all non-essential businesses closed, you need to make sure that your employees know they should go immediately to file for unemployment, and that they can file for unemployment by phone. They don't have to go to an office. They don't have to wait in line. They can make their application by phone. They're trying to handle these as quickly and expeditiously as possible, so that your people should be able to get covered right away. And I think it's imperative that people know, if you're not working, you can get coverage really, really quickly from the first moment that you're laid off.
Absolutely, and I believe that the panelists may have some questions regarding that, or you may even have some initial comments about the Earned Sick and Safe Leave law before we as we transition from the grant questions right now.
Well, I think part of it, we're trying to look at the legal interpretation of the law, but I looked at what the state said, and it was interesting. The state's interpretation of the state sick and safe law is that you use your employee benefit first before you go to the state. And that's what the state is saying.
Right.
And it's not clear to me what our language, there's been some discussion about what the real intent or what the language actually means, but our lawyers are going to sort that out as quickly as possible, and we will probably dovetail with the state. But I've heard from people that if you had to pay out everybody's sick pay, this is not meant to be a traditional, like something you carry forward and cash out at the end of your employment. This was to actually protect you when you were sick so you didn't lose pay. It's not meant to be something that's cashed out.
Correct. And so, as you know, yesterday evening, your staff, myself included, and part of the county attorney's office were having this conversation yet again. And the reason why we continue to have it is because it is such an important point of the people on this call, that they have the concern of our Office of Human Rights telling employees that they have the right to get this paid sick leave. And from those who were actually in the process and involved in creating the bill, it states that, you know, if an employee leaves, that the employer doesn't have to pay out. And the way we view that is, that's like with the Montgomery County government. If an employee has a sick leave balance, you don't get that paid out. That is standard across the board. But when you look at section 27-79 in that law, which is a few bullets down below, it says that if a business closes on the order of a public official in the event of a public emergency or crisis, just like the one that we are now, they are entitled to it. So there's some language there and some interpretation that we want to make sure is 100% clear. And I think the best way is to make sure that our lawyers are interpreting it the way that it was intended, and involving the state, because they do have a component into how our local law dovetail into their state law. And what we should do is, you know, make sure we get back to this team, because I know that this is not going to go away. But the point of your package and the relief package that you're offering, and that's why employee wages and benefits are included in reimbursable categories, is that we want to help the employer make sure they get through this while they help the employee. Is everyone helping everyone, but we just got to make sure that we do it in the right way.
And again, I go back to what I said before. If you cease to work because the business is closed, you're eligible at that moment for unemployment. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have a whole cluster of questions about how the grants will be implemented for nonprofits, but I think I heard you say that that is to be determined.
Yes.
So just so you all know that the question was asked. Next question is, an eligibility requirement for Maryland State Grant, the Maryland State Grant Program is for a company to have employees on payroll, i.e. W-2 employees. Will that be a requirement for Montgomery County?
How do you not have W-2 employees or 1099 employees? How do you not have people who are working for you, who are W-2? That you're supposed to be paying taxes. I'm not sure what the question is.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So we do have a question regarding, how this crisis will affect Montgomery County's grant cycle for nonprofits. So I'll, take a stab at answering this one. Is that I know that we have a separate team that is working with nonprofits, including Nonprofit Montgomery, to ensure that, we can minimize the impact as much as possible throughout our normal course of operations. So that is an ongoing conversation that we're having to ensure that we can continue business. So I will ask another question here is, what are your plans for rental assistance for tenants living in apartments? How much and how many people looking to help? So in summary, basically, what sort of relief do we have planned for rental assistance?
We have a small rental assistance program right now. We have a part of this program is $5 million that's targeted toward residents to help meet needs. That might well be a need that falls under the $5 million. There's also, I can't do this here, but I would suspend payments of rents for people who are unemployed and can't afford to pay rents right now, because it's, this is one of those things where I think you're going to need a bigger fix. If you're going to have a lot of unemployed people who aren't going to be paying rents. Again, just like you're going to have a lot of businesses who aren't going to be paying rents. And I know the governor, I think, has said no evictions. The local court has, for 2 weeks ordered no evictions, and I think they're going to extend that. I just think it's unrealistic to think that people who are unemployed for no fault of their own in a crisis like this are going to be able to come up with rent money. But we will look at how our money can be used in the absence of any broader state action.
Thanks. Next question. Is there a sense of what costs will be eligible in the Montgomery County grant programs? Is it hard costs like rent and equipment, et cetera, or can we apply to salaries so we can keep our staff on payroll, off unemployment, and on our group health care?
I guess I'd say that's a possibility. That's to be worked out in the regulations, but those are areas that I've seen addressed in the federal legislation where they're actually incentivizing people to do just that. So we'll look at how things dovetail with state and federal again, and we'll look at this, what the importance is of doing this locally. But that's a good question.
And I can tell you how it's initially written. And again, this is the version that has gone over. Please allow and know that it's subject to change. But it said the grant will reimburse for employee wages and benefits, rent, taxes, debt, utilities, inventory, equipment, or other and necessary financial obligations. That's how it was written.
Okay. We have a question from a child care provider who is remaining open during this time, but they are seeing a decline with children attending. So they have a question as far as, how are we planning, how's the county planning to help them? And I believe we've heard early on that child care providers may be considered as a small business and would be eligible to apply for the grant program. So can you confirm that?
Yeah, they're small businesses.
Thank you.
Okay. Can the county executive please provide some specifics as to what the criteria will be for this program for nonprofits?
I think we've answered this about a dozen times. We are developing the regulations for this, and you'll know the criteria when I think the regulations develop. Jerome, am I correct?
Yes, sir. That is exactly correct. We're giving as much information as we know today. That's all we can do. The timing of the call just happened to be right after the submission of the bill. We wish we could have more details, but we don't believe the answer was delaying this conversation with the community. Those were your two choices: come to the table with what we know, or delay it until we get more information. And we thought that it was very important to go ahead and address the community ASAP.
All right. We have one, our House of Worships included in the nonprofit for food programs and daycare programs that they have in place. As we stated before, we have not defined which nonprofits are eligible and not eligible. So I guess the answer to that, as we continue to define the grant program itself, right now, House of Worships, are they eligible?
I guess I'm trying to understand what they would be eligible for. If they're running food programs, we're running food programs before. Are they having a loss, or do they suddenly not have the money they had before to run the programs? We might look at that as what we need to do in order to continue a community service. And it might fall under it that way. We might treat it as under HHS as this is our network of community providers, and if they're struggling to provide, we may have to provide additional assistance under that rubric. But without knowing what they want money for example, if this is about expanding a program, something they're not doing now or weren't doing before this started, that's a whole other issue, and we would talk to them in terms of how this fits for what we're doing in the county to provide services. But that wouldn't be an emergency grant in that case.
Okay, next question. Oh, you want to say something, Jerome? Go ahead.
No, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Okay, this is from a home child care business. The question is, if I have to lay off employees and they file for unemployment, will that increase my unemployment insurance premium?
The governor has said no.
Oh, great.
That everybody understands what's going on here. This is nobody's fault. No employer is going to get dinged with higher rates because of the layoffs. So you don't have to worry about that.
That's great news.
Yeah.
Okay. As we continue with unemployment, let's see, I see I have a question here. Business is saying that they'd like to stretch the funds as best as they can, as well as support our employees. Will there be flexibility in unemployment benefits such that we can cover shortfall to furloughed employees and still have them eligible for unemployment?
If you pay people, they're going to get a reduction in how much unemployment they can get. And you're going to have to show it. You're not going to be able to make a payment and not show it. They're not going to be able to get a payment and not report it. What the state is doing, and I said this before, they are allowing they're allowing partial unemployment. And so if you have to reduce hours, a person will be able to file for unemployment based on the number of hours that they're working as compared to what they were working before their hours were reduced. So I think that's the way to handle it, that if you give them some money, they can still file for unemployment, but unemployment's going to want to know they collected it, and you don't want to get in trouble for giving money out. They don't want to take money and then discover that they owe taxes or wherever else on it at the end of the year, because you're going to have to report it and they're going to have to report it.
Okay.
Let's see, many of these questions are repetitive, just about the timeline for dispersing the grants. And again, we don't know that yet.
So let's see, while we're still scrolling through our questions here, why don't we address one that came in our preliminary questions from our survey. There were a number of questions regarding the tax deadline extension. So we want to give either the county executive or Jerome an opportunity to comment on that.
And thank you, Caroline. And I know the executive has his comments, but I just want to make sure that we're clear that the taxes that we're referring to are the business taxes in this scenario, the business personal property tax, hotel motel tax. There are some taxes out there within the county's control where there is action that may be considered in order to keep that revenue, keep that money in the hands of our business community for as long as possible.
And I'll just say, we're looking at it, I guess, flexibly. We're going to put off the collection of personal property tax and probably allow people not to delay payment of the hotel motel tax. That is not a cost. That's money that was collected off whoever stayed in the hotel for the purpose of paying the tax. So it's not, you're not really deferring a cost you have. You're just deferring a transfer, but we'll likely allow the deferral for a while of the transfer. We're not expecting a whole lot of hotel motel tax coming in, frankly, because it's not a tax. You only pay it on the rooms that are, you only collect it, I won't say pay, you only collect it on the rooms that are occupied. Without very many occupied rooms, we don't expect to see a lot of hotel motel tax that needs to be deferred. I want to digress here because I was looking up something on the state's page, and in their small business COVID-19 emergency relief fund, it's a $75 million loan fund for-profit businesses only. So the nonprofits, it appears, aren't in this, in that part of it. It offers no interest or principal payments for the first 12 months, then converts to a 36-month term of principal and interest with an interest rate of 2%. So that's what they're going to be offering on for-profits. For businesses and nonprofits, they have a $50 million grant program that offers grants up to $10,000, not to exceed 3 months of demonstrated cash operating expenses for the first quarter of 2020. Now, I'm going to guess that the governor is like the rest of us, and things will evolve as time goes on. because if this doesn't end in 3 months, obviously, the period of time is going to need to be longer than that. So these are his initial guidelines. This is the initial amount of money from the state. Stay tuned, because I think things are going to, as things evolve, we'll all be looking at it. But they have a very good webpage up on the state right now.
Next question has to do with, will there be any relief for property owners who can't collect rent?
That's a question we're going to have to deal with. It may come here. Like I said, this is one of those things, because I think it's going to be at such a scale that there's just going to have to be a timeout. I mean, it's hard to, I don't blame the property owners because they've got mortgages to pay. I'll just be blunt about this. I think, the banks have to be part of all the people who are taking a haircut. Workers are taking haircuts, employers are taking haircuts, landlords are taking haircuts, and it can't be that everybody takes a haircut, but at the end of the day, the banks are standing there and saying, I want all of my loan money, I want all of my mortgage money, I want everything, while everybody else is having to deal with not having the resources to pay these things. And I think at the federal level or the county or the state level, we're going to need some action to make sure that this pain is distributed among everybody, and that doesn't exclude one sector, which is better placed to deal with this than anybody. But I don't have that magical power. I asked, when I looked at what executive powers I might have, if I took emergency powers, I asked would I have this magical power, and I did not have this magical power, nor did I have any other magical powers at the point that were made it worthwhile to declare a local emergency, because the health officer in the county has all the powers they need under the governor's declaration.
All right, let's see. We have a question from a small business who only employs contractors. So they want to know, will the package provide relief for their contractors?
I guess that'll be hashed out when they look at the rules on this.
Okay.
I'm trying to imagine the cost for a contractor, if they're on somebody else's site, would be minimal, other than the loss of income. And then my first question is, are contractors who lose income because they're no longer employed by the people who contracted them, are they going to be able to use Maryland's relaxed unemployment? But that's something we'll look at and dig into.
Okay, next question. Will nonprofits be able to apply for funding relief spending if they already get support from the county council or contracts, county contracts, I would say?
Will they be able to apply for what relief?
For the emergency grant program.
If they get money from county contracts?
If they're already getting council money, or I guess the question is not clear, but I would assume it means if they have contracts with the county.
If you have contracts with the county, we're hoping that the contracts continue. And I'm hoping that your other sources of donations continue as well, if you're a nonprofit. This is a big part of the bigger issue we're going to have to address is if people who provide services as an extension of government begin to struggle for lack of other resources, what's the county going to need to do to make sure they can continue doing what they're doing? To be determined.
Right. And what I have been hearing is, just to clarify, if people have a nonprofit has a contract, but they're unable to provide the service that they get reimbursed for because of the shutdown. Say you provide services in schools, you can't provide the services. And so there's a lot of concern about that in the sector.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't meet contract obligations, then what happens?
Well, if you're not meeting contract obligations, say in the daycare center, you're not going to be employing people in the daycare center. They should be going to get unemployment. What's left should be a smaller universe of expenses. We are not substituting for unemployment. No one should think that the county is going to be is the stand-in for unemployment insurance. Everybody who's eligible, particularly as liberal as the state is treating this, needs to be able to go and get unemployment. That's not what this grant's about.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. We have a question here regarding where can one go to receive information about this grant?
So as I said before, you can get the information that's available now on the county council website because the bill should be there. Again, on the agenda page, there's a whole way that we list bills that are taken up on a particular day and how to download them, even listen to the discussion. And we will continue to make, I think as soon as the bill's out, we'll get the language up on the county website so people can see the bills. So Jerome, you can talk with our web people about getting the proposed legislation up, since I'm sure there's a lot of interest in it.
Absolutely.
All right, next question. Will it be possible to offer direct cash assistance to undocumented immigrants who are losing jobs but won't qualify for federal stimulus dollars?
Funny you should mention that. I wrote the governor's staff a couple of days ago, and I said, so all these programs for helping people in unemployment, how are you going to treat undocumented workers? I have not gotten an answer back yet. This is partly why we set $5 million aside, because if they're not eligible for unemployment, even though they've been working, these are the kind of families that we're imagining our assistance is going to need to go to, whether it's rent or whether it's food or, utilities. The utility companies have been pretty good about saying they're not going to do any turnoffs. They need to also say they're not going to collect, because you can not turn off a service, but if you're going to collect the moment the governor says, hi, the crisis is over, those tenants aren't going to be able to pay back electrical, gas, or any other services. So that's kind of where I envision the money having to go for the $5 million, not the $20 million.
All right, we have one question asking if organizations will be able to receive some level of financial support to cover emergency sick leave mentioned at the federal level.
Well, you've got your sick and safe leave that starts, the county law, so they're eligible for that. If there's additional federal assistance level, then we may not step in. I guess this goes to, if other people are providing something, we're not going to provide it also. We may supplement it if somebody's only providing an amount that's too low to be realistic. There may be a role for us. But if you're eligible for another program, then we're going to use the other programs. We're going to use our money for programs where there isn't someplace else to go.
Okay. There's a lot of very specific questions that, for example, I'm not sure if you all have the answer to this. If you have 2 jobs and get laid off from one, do you still qualify for unemployment? That's probably not your department, no. Am I right? Okay, thank you.
No, as long as you're working, and this is the complexity of unemployment law, because if you're still working and collecting a paycheck, but somebody didn't reduce your hours, somebody just laid you off, you could ask you, this is a reason to call the state unemployment line and ask them that question.
Okay, great, thank you.
Another specific one is, can we assume that nonprofits include arts nonprofits?
I would assume.
Okay. I got another one here that's quick, and I think we may have already addressed, is the nonprofits that are already funded through the county for services to residents? Will the county still be paying their invoices? The answer to that one is yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Will the county's child care initiative investment be shifted to ensure that child care programs are able to survive this and reopen when we get back to work?
We definitely want to be sure that people are able to survive and go back to work. One of the things I had in the budget, was an additional tranche of money for childcare. We think this is one of the most important things that we can do. What worries me is that if with unemployment, that really becomes a lasting problem, there may not be the demand for childcare in the short term. Because if you're not working, you're home with your kids. So we will continue to be flexible on this, but we want childcare to survive. We don't want centers to have to close, and we need them operating.
All right, let's see. I thought I saw a question here regarding, are there any efforts to crowdsource and generate funds from private citizens? And County Executive, I know that in our office, we do have one of your special assistants that is working with some of the philanthropies to help generate funds to help support the crises. So I don't know if you want to comment more on that.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think all of us need to remind folks in the community that the nonprofits are, on the one hand, have a bigger load than ever in some ways, and on the other hand, they're struggling for money. None of them, for example, put on any of their events since this all started. So there were major fundraising events that were planned for the spring that probably aren't going to happen. And so those are sources. I mean, I know some of these organizations get an enormous part out of for their operating budgets out of some of these balls and galas. And I'm hoping that, folks who would normally go to a ball and gala and write the nice check would just say, this year, I'm just going to write a check to the nonprofit I was going to give to anyway. I don't need to be fed. They need the money. But I think we just need to put that message out there. And I'll make a point of talking about that when I do some of my public speaking. It's a good point.
That's a great, thank you very much. And I noticed in the question and answer, there's a lot of questions about contracting and, other nonprofit issues like that. And I just want to remind people that Nonprofit Montgomery actually convenes a weekly call with DHHS. The call this week is at 3 o'clock this afternoon, where we will get into those types of questions for nonprofits. So encourage you to go to Nonprofit Montgomery's website and sign on the DHHS call for those specific questions. As far as this chat goes, here's a question from a restaurant owner. It says, my restaurant is open for carryout and delivery, but of course our sales have dropped 60%. We want to continue to stay open. Will we qualify for small business support even though we are still open?
I imagine if you're running losses and trying to stay open, that's one of the things that we'd consider. I mean, if but for our support you wound up closing, then we'd be helping you. That's kind of ironic. So I'm hoping that we look at what we can do to support people. If you've reduced people's hours, again, Maryland unemployment, the more that we can use the unemployment system for reduction in hours or loss of employees that you've had, the less load you're going to have to carry. So I'm hoping everybody is thinking about the use of all these multiple institutions that we have.
Okay, thank you. We have one question regarding PPE. Businesses, including nonprofits, are finding it increasingly difficult to access PPE for employees, as well as sanitizing supplies. So the question is, will the county provide support and be able to help these businesses get these supplies?
So I'll be really blunt about this. Everybody is struggling. The hospitals are struggling for supplies. The county government is struggling for supplies. One reason we don't make some things more widely available is that everything is being focused on our caregivers and people who are directly exposed to patients or maybe exposed to patients. For people who don't know what a PPE is, that's personal protective equipment, just in case anybody was wondering. It's masks, gowns, cleaning supplies. The county's bringing in cleaning supplies, and we certainly don't have any surpluses of it at this point. We're trying to identify any larger supplies or vendors who've got larger supplies. You can imagine every vendor in the country is being tapped out, and everybody is struggling with the same thing. Hospitals are racking their brains, and these are hospitals that are having their supply chains not be able to provide everything they need. So we are doing what we can, but I don't think we're going to become a general supplier until we're sure that we address the county's needs and we're able to address the needs of the healthcare workers, because that's our first line of defense.
Next question. You mentioned that there may be a cap on the number of employees to participate in the program. I think the cap was 100. Does that include nonprofits, or does that apply to for-profits only?
If it's a cap applied to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
The way it's written now.
County Executive, we have a question here from an individual asking, what about those businesses that are owned by residents without documents and who will not get any support from the federal? What are we doing about those businesses?
If you've got a business and a license and are operating, I don't plan on asking that question any more than I asked that question any other time. That's not a Montgomery County question. So if you've got a storefront and you're out there and you've got issues, you'd be treated like any other small business. You're employing people, you're doing all the things we want people to do now and be able to continue once we come out of this. So I personally would not make that distinction. I hope the legislation doesn't make that distinction. With our money, we're not tied by some of the restrictions that we are with federal money. So hopefully we can be more broad-minded in what we do.
Okay. Next question. Will businesses be required to open after the crisis if they receive grant funding from the county's program?
I can't force anybody to open. So, the purpose of the grant funding is really to make sure that you can weather this storm and be in a position to open later on. I imagine anybody evaluating a grant request may wonder if there's no intention to reopen. Shouldn't we be focusing on businesses that plan on reopening, because we're going to need to make sure they're able to do that. So I certainly wouldn't start with the assumption that you're not going to reopen. Again, we'll talk to the drafters of the bill and how the regs are written. But I'm not sure how broadly you wanted that question interpreted.
Thank you.
Okay. I know there was a question here about the application period, and I know we're still working on those criteria, so we'll get back. But one mentioned that in Washington, D.C., that it closes on the 31st. So there's some comments that we're seeing in the Q&A that we will definitely review and use those to help us as we're working out the logistics of the program.
Yeah, I don't see how I could have the same closing date as DC if I don't have the stuff set up
Right.
at the same time DC has it set up.
Okay, a couple of questions. Could you speak more about incentivizing keeping employees for those who can?
Well, I think that's going to have to be looked at in the grant process in terms of what do we need a grant for, and how does that match with your losses? You know, what losses are you taking that are unsustainable, and where would our grant fit into that? But again, you know, I point you back to the federal government. If you're paying taxes, the federal government's going to be offering tax credits for people who maintain employment. And so that's the source of money that did not exist until yesterday. And we're going to, you know, I think one of the things that would be helpful is for my staff to compile a full list that we can put on the webpage of all of the state and federal programs as we understand them. It's going to have to be an evolving list. I could put Chuck Schumer's bill up there today because I just got a copy of it, but you would look at the bill and say, yeah, how does this actually work? So as things develop, we should make sure that our website reflects the evolution of both state and federal programs, and that we can direct you to links that are appropriate that would address employment and tax credits so that people can see where else to go. I mean, we're part of this web, and this is only going to work, or it'll work a hell of a lot better if we tie you into all the other pieces of the web, and we're able to make sure that everybody takes maximum advantage of everything that's out there.
Okay, we have a question. Someone states that CVS, Amazon, Walmart, and other internet merchants are said to be hiring a large number of new employees to handle the explosive growth and demands for online services. How can Montgomery County take advantage of that demand by offering facilities, services, and workforce? Are our business development folks talking to the prospective employers?
I don't know what what the Economic Development Corporation is doing right now regarding that. We can find out what they're doing regarding that. Amazon has warehouses. I'm not sure they're looking to stand up more. They, you know what they've done is they've shifted all their shipments away from fun consumer goods to things that are needed, more related to the crisis. And if CVS has a warehouse here, it would be good to know if they're hiring. We could certainly publicize that. So again, we can follow up and see whether any of the local people, if they've got warehouses in the DC metro area, are they hiring? And so I guess I'll task one of my staff to contact ECD to make sure that they're reaching out. This is something they can do right now that I think would be really useful.
Okay, we have a couple questions here that have to do with the community grants. Somebody asking if organizations had been approved for a community grant to begin July 1. Will that be affected by this crisis? Is there a chance that those grant approvals will be not approved in the budget? And what about any new funding for community grants?
So when people go through the budget, I'm pretty sure that they're going to start prioritizing the community grants. It's not a lot of money, but I would be surprised if that escapes scrutiny altogether. And there's some things in there which are nice to do, and there's some things in there that are essential to do, and there are probably things in there that need to be done at a more intense level than what the level they were funded at. I mean, grant requests always vastly exceed our available amount of money. And one of the least favorite things I have in my job has been to try to fit the grant requests within the amount of money that's been available for grants. So I expect that we'll look at it, that it will get looked at, but our intention is if something can open on July 1, that we'd like to do that. I cannot predict right now when this ends. You know, you've seen New York, so they're going through the surge right now. Nobody knows whether you go through the surge and then suddenly the cases peter away and everything returns to normal, or whether the surge gives way then to a steady but high level of use of facilities. We are frankly not doing what the Chinese did in Wuhan, where they did, shelter in place to the most extreme degree possible. The governor didn't order shelter in place, but what he said was, you shouldn't be outside doing anything unless you're making an essential trip. I don't see everybody doing that. And I don't see every business that's non-essential having made the decision to close. I mean, it's one thing to keep an auto dealer open to do repairs. It's a different thing to keep an auto showroom open so people can come in and look at and touch and sit in cars, which strikes me as, gee, I hope you're not really doing that. So it's hard to say when this ends. I wish I could answer this. We asked the state, we had a meeting with the hospitals last night. We asked the state what they anticipated in the surge, and the person who came did not have the data with him. And so we're working at developing a model in conjunction with other regional governments to look at what we think the surge is going to be in the DMV region and Montgomery County specifically. And that will begin to give you a window as if this is when it peaks, you can think about when it starts to peter off. But I got to say, I've said this a million times, if everybody avoids every contact they can possibly avoid, this thing gets better faster. You can't go about business as usual and expect this thing to end anytime soon.
Okay, thank you. As I do a time check, I see we have 8 minutes for this conference. So there is two questions, topics, some comments that I'm seeing on the Q&A that will help us pivot to our wrap up here. And I also want to provide time for closing remarks by the county executive and Jerome. So Jerome, one may be pulling out our talking points. There were a number of questions that came in the Q&A stating that, what about the questions that we submitted in advance? Will they get addressed? And I know our effort was to try to answer those questions up front in the talking points. So you may want to pull that out and highlight some of those as we wrap up. Another comment that I saw is if someone has solutions or suggestions for how to help in defining how the program will look, who should they talk to in county government? Where can they submit their suggestions for how to offer relief to businesses?
All right, so what I would say is, I think that based on how we try to answer the questions we received in advance in this conversation, we should actually put those questions online and have the answers to them, the ones that don't, repeat themselves, because there is a lot of repetition, but there's a lot of good information in there as well. So we want to make sure that that is communicated. And as far as how do you get questions answered going forward, our business advancement team, which is of course led by Tina Benjamin, has developed an email box that is called BizInfo COVID-19. That's BIZINFO COVID COVID 19 at montgomerycountymd.gov. And we'll put that on the website as well. And that is where we want you to direct your business questions going forward. That email box will be read and staffed by our business team, and we will provide you an answer as soon as possible.
So, you want me to close out, Jerome?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so first of all, I appreciate everybody getting on this call, who got on this call. At one point, I think there were 500 or more people on it, which is pretty amazing. So I just want to thank everybody. Our answers are going to evolve, and so we will continue to increase the robustness of our website, because questions you asked today, hopefully a lot of them will be addressed when the language of the bill and if the regulations are worked out. Other questions about state and federal programming and how we all tie together, we should be able to start accumulating that information and making that front and center so you know where to go, probably on a page that says something like all things COVID. But we want to also make sure that there's a business call out so you don't have to sort through everything to get to the information that you need. I'm perfectly willing to do this again, to continue to communicate with folks in the business community. I want you to know that I am well aware that this problem is it's different than the recession. It's different than 9/11. It has the potential to cause enough damage to the economy that it lasts beyond the virus itself, which is why I am, making a great effort to work at the state level to make sure we start thinking about programs in terms of how do they help businesses emerge from this successfully, and not just expect or think that people are going to be able to go back up and start running the day after the governor says, okay, the emergency is over. If people do not have confidence about what that environment is going to look like, they may make that decision to shut now and shut forever. I would encourage all of you to reiterate to the governor's office in a nice way, because it's not like he's been a problem on this, but in a nice way that grants are more important than loans, that if you're going to do loans, the loans have to be very long-term with an upfront period where there is no payment, because you cannot be able to restart a business and get going without some breathing space, and just adding another debt may not be something anybody can endure. So emphasize that, and to emphasize support for some kind of pause in rents and payments that were due during this period, because the last thing you're going to be able to deal with is demands for payment as soon as the governor says emergency is over, because that'll just heighten your emergency. I get it. I'm trying to, lobby is the wrong word, but maybe it's the right word. I've been trying to lobby and implore the staff in the governor's office to move in this direction. I thought the language that he used in his announcement earlier was interesting to me, having talked with him. And I'm going to continue to do my part to make sure that there's a transition and a ramp up so that when this ends, we get to normal as quickly as possible, as opposed to trying to get to normal in the midst of this disaster, which some people seem to think is a reasonable thing to do. I don't. Thank you very much.
Thank you, County Executive Elrich. And I want to thank all of our participants for attending and answering your questions. We tried to answer as many as possible. And as Jerome has stated, at the end of this, we will find a method to post the questions as well as the answers. Today's session was recorded, so we will also make that available as well, and we will push that out to everyone that participated in the conference today. So once again, thank you for your participation. And everyone stay safe and healthy.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
And don't play on play equipment.
Preferably.
At all.
Right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.